Do you borrow money because it's convenient? Or do you borrow because it's helping you reach a goal? There's a saying in finance: consumer debt destroys wealth, but strategic debt builds it. If we're taught anything at all, it's to fear debt and that being debt-free is the ultimate goal. And for the consumer, that's true. But if you look at the balance sheets of the wealthiest people and the largest companies, you won't find zero debt. You'll find leverage. Today on Escape the Clock, I'm speaking with a professional lender who has deployed over $600 million in commercial funding. He has sat on the other side of the desk, deciding who gets the money to build their dream and who gets a rejection letter. We're going to break down the banker's blueprint on what is good debt, how to use leverage to accelerate the ways to freedom, and how to identify a bankable asset. Stay tuned to learn how to stop looking at debt like a consumer and start looking at it like a capitalist. Welcome back to Escape the Clock, the show where we discuss strategies for achieving financial freedom and having the option not to work. I'm your host, Daniel C. Rogers. In the personal finance world, we're often told to play defense, cut coupons, stop buying lattes, and pay off all debt. But if you look at the Federal Reserve's data, business owners have a median net worth nearly 9 times higher than wage earners, $1.3 million versus $155,000. Why is that? Well, it's not because they skip more lattes, but because of leverage. In the project management world, we would use leverage to get more done with fewer resources. In the financial world, leverage works much the same way. It amplifies your results. It can amplify your wealth, or it can amplify your bankruptcy. It's a double-edged sword. So how do you use this weapon without cutting off your hand? How do you shift from saver to capitalist? Well, my guest today has both experience and insights to navigate that very question. Walt Postelwait has spent over 20 years at the intersection of commercial lending and risk management. He has overseen the development of over $600 million in funding to small businesses and real estate projects. He is currently the co-founder of Portfolio Watch, helping banks identify risk before it happens. Walt, welcome to Escape the Clock.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm excited to be here. I think we've got a great conversation coming up.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this. I'm probably one of the listeners here because this isn't something I did as much with as I probably should have. I probably could have accelerated my plan much faster if I understood this topic better. So I'm really interested because you have such a unique vantage point from all the decades you've spent approving loans as a banker, but also the borrowing money as an investor yourself. Mm-hmm. So how did sitting on the lender side of the table change the way you structure your own deals when it came to borrowing yourself?
It gave me a lot of in-house knowledge. In banking and in finance, there's a lot of jargon. There's a lot of just kind of untold rules that are played by. This is why the people who have been borrowers and investors for a period of time get better and better at it because they don't teach this stuff in school. They just don't. And like you said, the messaging out there is save money, work hard, and eventually you will be able to get ahead. And we talk with our kids quite often about finances, and my son will be very quick to point out that strategy, save, work hard, get ahead. That might have worked in the 50s and 60s, but the new paradigm, that doesn't work. And so with the lending, the more you do it, the better you get. And for me, for my household, especially, and we'll talk more about the apartment complex we pulled off, that was creative financing through and through, leveraging limited capital, leveraging relationships, and leveraging kind of a unique situation. But as we'll talk about, it got uprooted by global events that unfortunately nobody can really control. And there's always luck involved.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually excited to talk to you about that because you've been through the stress test that so many of us think about when it comes to things like this. Because, it's risky to think about borrowing and you need that leverage. But the more you borrow, the more nervous you can be about that and the more risk you got to think about. I'm really curious, though, since you were the one deciding who was getting approved or rejected. Mm-hmm. When a regular investor would bring a deal to the table, be it real estate or even just a business acquisition or whatever it was, what specifically separated the top 10% of the people who you would say yes to versus all the rest who wouldn't get it?
I would say kind of character is first and foremost. I spoke, through my career, which spans over 30 years now, so I'm dating myself. But I can remember having conversations with people who were flying by the seat of their pants. They might have a business plan, but it was not really well thought out. To the other extreme, where you have somebody who has a 50-page business plan, whole bunch of fancy graphs, all kinds of data. But the sweet spot I found was actually somewhere in between. Those that had no plan and those that overachieved on the plan, I would say I kind of put them in the same bucket, where what I would try to assess was that person's acumen to actually pull off the plan. And, life happens. So whatever your business plan is, you have to know that it's not going to be exact. There's going to be headwinds. Some things will work, some things won't. And so I would say character is really that driver. How can that business owner articulate why I should believe when things go wrong that they're still going to be at the table and they have a greater vested interest in the success than I do? Because the reality is when you take on debt, especially for a business enterprise, the lender truly is taking on more financial risk because that's what leverage is, while at the same time looking at a smaller return. So it's kind of this inverted risk reward where the lender is taking on the majority of the risk. But if the lender is charging 7, 8, 10%, well, you're doing it because you want to make 25, 50%. And so you got to really connect with that lender. And first and foremost, Daniel, what I'll say is anybody in the audience who is either engaged in a business or wants to do some business, you got to start by building a relationship with the lender. And I'm a big fan of community banks. I think smaller banks are far better for most people than, the big national banks or the super regionals. Those institutions play a role in the financial scheme, but for most people, I really think it's the community banks. Credit unions are now able to do business lending, but they're still kind of on a learning curve. And then there's another whole industry out there called community development financial institutions, CDFIs. And those are really good for business entrepreneurs who aren't yet bankable, because a CDFI's goal is to get you capital and then get you to a point where you can go into the traditional banks. But you got to start before you're asking for money. And it can be as simple as knowing who your local banker is, take them out to coffee and pick their brain. They are always prospecting. If you can have a conversation and share your ideas, get some feedback from them, and then whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the road, and now you're looking for some debt capital, you actually have somebody to talk to, and that person already knows kind of where you're going. So to me, that's first and foremost.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We had David Webb on the show a little while ago, the author of No Money Millionaire, and he was talking about how he had nothing he could even use for collateral when he was starting out. He was looking to use other people's money for leverage to start to invest into different properties. And the relationship part that you just talked about was so critical. But also the other thing you touched on earlier, which is having that kind of grit to just see it through. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to hear, like, on the other side of the table, that's something that comes across. Like it needs to be there. Without that, it's almost like you're not going to get off the ground. Yeah. Is there any specific red flags or anything that you would look for, though, in the deal that you would be like, okay, maybe it's credit score or something else? You're like, oh, we can't even consider this. It's just too risky.
Absolutely. And I would say that the kind of the generic ones are, credit score. I'm not a big fan of a 3-digit number. I've seen credit scores manipulated. I've seen somebody who had a bankruptcy, 2 years prior, do all the things right and drive their credit score higher than a multimillionaire who had 24 different properties. Just because they've got a lot of debt, because they've got a lot of assets, their credit score was actually lower than the 2-year-old BK. So not a big fan of the credit scores, but the reality is credit scores do drive the bus. The other aspect is capital is still important. You got to have skin in the game. And normally I would say you should at least plan on at least 5% of your cash or collateral or something at stake. You can always try other people's money. Today, I think that's harder than it was before, not because the other people money is harder to attract, because with the sideways stock market and assets varying in value, frankly, I think there is capital sitting out there that wants to help young entrepreneurs, but the credit goes in cycles. And right now it's pretty conservative. But where I think the unknown red flag is just the accountability. If I'm a typical lender, I'm talking to 4 to 10 businesses at any one time. The businesses I'm going to work with are those that are engaged. They return my phone call. When I ask for another document or some information that is missing, they get it back to me quickly. The borrower is going to be most engaged in the credit activity when that prospective borrower is seeking money. If a lender reaches out and it takes a week for you to call them back, you go to the bottom of the pile, because they know that down the road, after the loan is made and you're going to have to supply financial statements, you're going to have to provide information. When things go bad, the bank wants you to get engaged. If you're not really engaged up front, we know you will not be engaged at the back end. And so to me, that is the hidden red flag that most people don't understand. And, business owners are always busy. You wear a lot of hats, but you've got to take care of your most important relationships. And typically that is in and around capital.
It dawned on me, you touched on pretty much all the 5 C's already of credit: character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. And I am curious, I wanted to ask you about personal guarantees when it comes to collateral for a moment. I know a lot of people are really nervous about the idea of signing a personal guarantee. Is it possible, in your experience, to get leverage without betting some like the house on it? How much should we be afraid of that?
You're not going to like the answer. Your audience isn't going to like the answer. For those starting out, those that have the least amount of firepower, the personal guarantees are going to be sought after more. Where you start seeing non-recourse loans, that's what we call it when there's no personal guarantee, there's no recourse back to you, the business owner. That tends to be on the larger loans. Underwritten some loans here recently that are in the 25 million kind of range, where they get structured where there is no personal guarantor because there's a few different business entities that are involved. And so from a check the box kind of standpoint, there are corporate guarantees, but there's really no assets there. So it's this kind of weird thing where the deeper your personal financial statement is, the more likely you can get away from a personal guarantee, even though your personal guarantee means a lot more. And so I've always explained it to my clients as the personal guarantee is important because, like I said, we know that things are going to happen. So if things start to go sideways, we need to make sure that you will be at the table. We're not going to necessarily take your house. We're not going to, do those things. And frankly, there's ways to play defense, with different types of bankruptcies to protect that. But that personal guarantee means that, again, I've got more financial risk than you have financial risk, Mr. Borrower. So if the project goes sideways, you need to be at that table so we can have a conversation, because if I'm going to solve that problem, I can tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to close the business. I'm going to liquidate assets. If you're interested in solving the problem, you have a lot more knobs to turn and levers to pull than I do. So we need to make sure that individual, the person who's making the decisions, are at the table. So you can try to get around a personal guarantee. If you've got some other people's money coming in, you can sometimes get a limited guarantee from them. But I think the honest expectation is you're probably going to have that personal guarantee.
That's really helpful. And I think that it keeps coming back to relationships, I think, when I'm hearing this. You have to be able to build that relationship and that trust and work together like a partner.
Trust is really important. And frankly, relationship is an overplayed word these days, but it is just really important because money is money. And from the lender aspect, and as a layperson, my clients don't really understand this, but if I do a loan and things don't go well, we have to default the loan, we liquidate collateral, and, we go through that charge-off process. If I have to charge off $100,000, that is an actual real money loss to my organization. I have to go out and lend usually 10 times that amount to try to make it up on the loan fee or earned interest. If a lender loses on a credit, it takes a lot of effort to backfill what was lost. So that's why it's so important. And that's why lenders do say no, because of that credit risk. And it's so difficult to make it up on the backside.
I want to get into the meat of it now a bit, which is most people, when they're going to think about borrowing, they're probably thinking about consumer debt, right? Like, how am I going to borrow to buy the boat? But what we're talking about here is strategic leverage,
right?
Borrowing with intention and part of your plan so that you could maybe buy a business, develop passive income. You could do something part of your freedom plan. And either from your perspective as someone playing that role and using that mindset shift, or imagine you're coaching somebody who's only ever really worked with consumer debt and is now interested to do strategic leverage well. How would you ideally want to see that go? Is there any kind of guardrails you think that someone needs to be put in place? How do they avoid bad debt and make sure what they're doing is on the good debt side?
It's actually really easy, in my opinion. I always tie it back to what is the debt related to, right? So you mentioned like a car loan. I think you said a boat loan, right?
Right.
And if the debt is related to a depreciating asset, which means your asset is worth less tomorrow than it is today, you probably shouldn't put a lot of debt on it. I'm not saying that all consumer debt is bad. I'm just saying that that's the bad kind of debt. The credit card debt, where it's not tied to any assets, that's the worst.
Right.
In the business world too, I'd say the utmost worst is the merchant service loans. For a business that does a lot of credit card swipes, you can get a loan, literally like in 2 days or tighter based on your swipes, but they're taking out each. That is a terrible debt cycle to get out of, and the interest rates are really high, and that's, I would call that not bad debt, but deadly debt. I think once a business gets into that, they're on a trajectory which is not favorable. Consumer debt, where you are borrowing 80-90% of depreciating asset, that's kind of bad debt. If a business is getting debt, you're doing something with that debt, right? If you're buying a business, you're buying a cash flow. That is how you buy a business, and that's how you evaluate what that business is worth. And you're getting into that business for one of two reasons. One, you think that the price of that business meets the amount of money that is being produced, and you're happy with that rate of return on that investment. It's perfectly okay. But most people are buying a business because they believe that the business is underperforming. That if I buy it for X, I put, Y capital and Z time into it, my business will be more valuable because of these activities. And so these are assets that are increasing in value. You could say real estate falls into this as well. Usually, whether it's a home, a duplex, a fourplex, or commercial real estate, or housing, multifamily housing. Usually, in most cycles, I used to say it always goes up, but I have experience has proven different. But usually, those are assets that are increasing in value. So leveraging debt there is okay. There are cycles. Should you be in at 90-95% of leverage, loan to value? Probably not, because what I've seen both in my clients and frankly I experienced myself is when you leverage up that high, typically you're using most of your earned income off of whether it's a real estate asset or a business asset. You're kind of using up all your horsepower just to service the debt. We've seen, especially in the last 5 years, and I would say for me over the last 30 years, we have these cycles. So your asset is a solid asset. It will always have some value and it will always produce some amount of revenue. But if today you go all the way up to the maximum leverage and now your income from that asset is like covering the debt plus a little bit more, what happens when there's a down cycle and now your revenue has dropped, the actual cash you get from that asset drops 15%? Well, now it doesn't pay the loan anymore because that loan payment's probably going to be static. So now you're having to find money from other sources to put to service this debt. And now because the market changed and when you buy, this is why I like commercial real estate and commercial businesses far more than like a single family residence, which is much more emotionally driven. When you look at a business asset, whether real estate or a business, you truly are buying a stream of cash. So like I said, you bought here today, you leveraged all the way up, following your actual cash coming out of that asset has now decreased. That means that the value of that asset has actually decreased because now, I'm having to feed it $1,000 a month out of my own personal cash flow, and I don't want to do that. So I look to sell it. Well, I bought it when it was producing this much cash on an annual basis. That cash flow has now dropped. The value of that asset has dropped. Yes, you can get into some kind of macroeconomics and, interest rates may have gone down or changed but fundamentally, you buy a commercial asset, a business asset for that stream of cash flow. So now you're having to feed that loan and your asset is not as valuable. So that's why I still think that don't want to over leverage good debt. All good things can come bad in overindulgence, right? And capital and debt is that.
Well, imagine for a moment I'm your client and I want to buy a laundromat. I'm really interested in it. I think it's a good investment and I might upgrade the machines and do a couple things, right? But I think it's going to have good cash flow, especially pretty quickly. I think it'll have a good turnaround. Mm-hmm. How would you counsel me moving forward? Is there a certain debt to equity ratio I should be mindful of or an interest rate I should be looking for? And how should I be thinking about approaching it in a way where I'm not stressing myself out with just the borrowing part? And because the business itself is going to have its own stress.
Absolutely. So with the banker hat on, what I can tell you is let's look at the pro forma. 90% of the debt out there is cash flow lending. So where we start is you purchase this business, you've seen what it does historically. The reason why you want to do new machines is because you think you can probably reduce the expenses. You're going away from quarters and you're using cards. So, you can increase now your customers of your laundromat. So you kind of build out this future revenue. Hopefully you have built out what your expenses are and you know what your bottom line cash is going to be. You can have a conversation with your banker. You can get an idea of what that interest rate's going to be. And you can then kind of play around with, my interest rate's going to be around, I'll say 7.5%. And I can get, since these are kind of hard assets, between the real estate and the equipment, I can do a 15-year loan. You now can't have enough information where you can build out some amortization schedules. So you can look at this and say, okay, if I borrow $1 million, this is what my annual payment's going to be, and this is how much I have left over. At a minimum, you want to have net cash in your pocket of $1.25 for every dollar that you owe in a loan payment. And that's it's called a 1.25 debt to service cover ratio. Very standard in lending. Some lenders might do 1.20, so they want you to be making $1.20 for every dollar. But with a laundromat, which tends to be very cyclical, I love laundromats. I really like mini storage. There's some low barrier of entry businesses out there that I really like, and I've talked and I've helped finance. But I can tell you with some of these, because they have lower barrier of entries and they're cyclical, and this is usually a gateway drug for a business, right? So this is going to be, maybe it's a first-time business owner or it's a W-2 wage earner that sees this opportunity, and this is, call it a side gig, right? I'm keeping my day job, which is great because now as a lender, I can use the wages you earn to help offset my concern with the laundromat. So
it's other collateral in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an extra cash flow stream. So I'm a big fan of W-2 wage earners, going in this direction. Don't give up your day job too early because W-2 income, really is more powerful than self-employed income for most people. But anyway, so because I know that these types of businesses tend to have these kind of first-time business owners, I'm probably going to want a 1.35 cover, meaning I want this business asset to really produce a buck 35. And I'm going to talk to you, right, Daniel, as far as this, why do you think this revenue is going to stick? All right. Your revenue is up 40% from what it's done pretty consistently for the last 3 years. Why do you think you can come in here, sprinkle some seasoning on it? And now, so this goes back to our first part of our conversation about character. I need you to clearly articulate to me why you think you can execute this plan. And if your numbers don't really sync with reality, I may not say, no, the conversation's over, but I might stress test this, all right? If Daniel thinks that revenue is going to increase 40% and I can get to a 135 cover, what if revenue only goes up 15%? What kind of cover do I have there? In my scenario where revenue only goes up 15%, now my cover is really only like a 115 or a 120. But you've got your W-2 wages over here and, your personal debt, you don't have a whole bunch of credit cards and you're not getting a brand new F-350 every other year, so I can see that you've got additional discretionary income from your day job. Well, now I can get to a yes, but that's how we would walk through that process.
Well, let's go into the stress testing because you lived through that.
Yes.
Like you had what I would call a black swan event in your life because you had 66 units and this was a big project for you.
It was.
So maybe you can talk through what that was. And also for the listeners here who might be thinking about building their own portfolios, how they might think about stress testing before they even start having some of these conversations so they can anticipate some of the feedback and get in the right mindset to be adaptive to things that might go wrong.
No, I had a mentor of mine. His name's John Burtis. He had a saying that falling down flat on your face is still forward movement, which it is technically. And I look at the apartment complex, got some wounds and scars that are still healing, but I learned a lot. This was built creative financing, 501. I mean, this was pretty elaborate. The reality is I probably ignored some red flags. We talked about red flags. I probably ignored some of the red flags that I should have caught, but I drank the Kool-Aid. Let's just say that. So this was in a smaller rural community, spent 20 years there in community banking. I had a lot of relationships, did a lot of community development. The community had transformed. Like most rural communities that are natural resource extraction based, they change. When we moved there, it was kind of on the upswing. It was becoming a tourist destination. While we were there, we were there for 20 years. While we were there, we saw 7 brand new hotels built. We saw restaurants get created. We saw a lot of stuff get created. And one of the best breweries in Oregon, right, launched there. And I think there's 5 or 6 breweries there now. So the huge upswing in business and tourism and everything that brings. Beautiful place to live, great community, saw a huge influx of retirees, 2 hours from one main metro area, 3.5 hours from another one. But what happened, again, and this is not unique to this rural community, housing costs went up considerably. And what we started to see is that the workers that are essential for these types of businesses and these kind of tourist economies, they couldn't afford to live in that community. And that's a shame. But there's all kinds of programs for low-income housing projects, all kinds of tax subsidies. And it's probably a conversation for another day, but I think a lot of it's a racket because it shouldn't cost $500,000 a door to build single bedroom and studio apartments, but that's what we saw happening. So you got the low-income housing that is taking care of one type of population, and you have, strong market rent, which is taking care of another. But the gap in what we saw in this community was what I call workforce housing, which is where these are people who are employed. They're usually working 30 to 60 hours a week in various restaurant, retail type of customer service jobs. how do we create a place for them to afford? And so seeing what was happening, it was back in 2018, I started kind of, thinking that there might be some tools here unique to the time event that this was all taking place. And because I had spent so much time in this community, financing projects, knowing people, I had some good contacts. So there was this piece of land, beautifully located, waterfront, next to groceries. You could walk to the downtown core, easily bike. I mean, it was a great piece of property. It was zoned commercially. So at the time, it had some outright uses. It could be multifamily housing. It could be hospitality, hotel, motel. So we looked at this and we came up with a financial model that would use a combination. It was actually 3 separate buildings, total of 66 units. We were going to use the waterfront building and use that as short-term housing, vacation rentals. The other 2 buildings, which were on the side streets, still nice location, nice units, would be what we would call workforce housing, because the short-term rentals, we could generate more revenue off of that, which then could help subsidize the rents, on this property. And we could, on paper, make all of this pencil where it would work for, financially for us. It would work financially for the bank. It was to be a great asset for the community. So the first warning sign I had on this, and we had very little money. I'm banker by trade, but we've had some rentals. We've had other things, tend to always have kind of side hustle going on. But we were a single income family. I was blessed with a good career that allowed my wife to stay home for 19 years and raise the 3 kids. But we had to make a lot of sacrifices. And that sacrifice is, I didn't have a big 401k. We had a few properties, but, those were leveraged up. And frankly, we're using income from those properties to, do vacations and do other stuff. So we looked at this project. It was bigger than I wanted. I wanted to do 12 units, but that parcel didn't work. It had a bunch of easements and stuff, sewer lines that weren't recorded anywhere in the due diligence. So we pulled the trigger on this. The first capital stack I put together was going to use opportunity zone funding. I knew somebody in the community who had sold a lot of property. They had a lot of capital gains. This was in an opportunity zone. It was going to work out great. We shook hands. We were like drawing things up. But there was a conversation they had with some outside individuals in the community, but not part of the table conversation. And they decided that this property should be a hotel. Had no interest in being involved in a hotel. And I think there had been tons of headwinds because with the 7 hotels that were built, there were some others proposed and the community didn't want them. So it's like, no, that's not what we're going to do. So that was capital stack number 1. Capital stack number 2 came along. The person I was talking to had $1 million of liquidity that was going to be opening up in January, part of his stock option plan, if I remember right. Liked him. Had the same vision, right? This was good investment, but it was a good investment for the community as well. But then unfortunately around Thanksgiving, his daughter survived, but she OD'd on heroin. And he was unaware of the drug addiction there. And he stepped back from everything and said, I have to focus on my family. And I applaud that. That was the right decision. So literally, we had to go through 3 different capital stacks. And at this point, we had probably $80,000 of our own money invested in, all the surveys, all the studies and all that. So I should have walked away, but I didn't. I had I can recall an internal conversation that I had, chose to stick with it. And man of strong faith, kind of had a conversation with God and decided to go my own way. But anyhow, so we found a 3rd option. People came to the table. Everybody was excited. I was working with the same lender that started with, option number 1. They were excited about the project. Ironically, the regional president I had worked with early on in my career at Bank of America, so we knew each other. Everybody's excited. And we closed on the property September 30th of 2020.
Yikes.
2020. So the process started in 2018 with the brainstorming. these various capital stacks happened in 2019. The Thanksgiving that I referenced, where the gentleman's daughter had OD'd, was 2019. So we were in COVID. We saw things happening. We were experiencing these shutdowns. Societal fabric was tearing, but another red flag. But I was so emotionally invested with this project at this point that I kept pushing for it. So we finally closed on the land September 30th. As a banker, I know that you don't go into a construction project without all of the money present to finish the construction project. So I broke one of my own personal professional rules, because what the bank wanted to do, and I can't blame the bank, because we were 2020. We thought we were going to have loan approval in February, and then it became March, and then it became April. And as COVID world is unwinding, banks didn't want to make any decisions because they had no idea what tomorrow was going to look like. So they were slow walking the whole process of approval. The person who we were buying the land from, I knew. He was doing a very large seller carryback that was going to be subordinate to the bank. And then I brought another investor in who brought real money to the table. My wife and I borrowed, equity out of our home. And so all this came together in September, but for the bank, it was only a land loan. So they were coming in for a small dollar amount, because most of the vast amount of the purchase price, the seller was carrying back. But it gave us enough money to start the dirt work, because this was kind of bare land. We had a lot of infrastructure. Well, the bank said we'll close on the overall project by the end of the year. Well, it actually took them a year. So we actually closed on the full construction loan in September 30th of 2021. So now we're like full on in COVID, right? We've got all these money subsidies coming out from the government. Everybody's walking around with cash, and what started to happen? Everything got expensive. We haven't even hit the supply chain issues, supply and demand. If demand goes up because everybody has all of this cash, supply would stay the same, but everything started to go up. So it took us a year to get there. General contractor was kind of slow walking the construction because he knew the situation. I was very transparent with everybody. And he didn't want to get pinched with, costs that couldn't be paid because the full construction loan hadn't gotten closed. So anyway, we burnt a year of interest reserves. As most construction loans are, they're variable. So now we're a year into, I think the interest rate went from like 3.5% to 4.5%, maybe 4.75%. Everything's getting more expensive. Now we have issues with our contingencies, but we're moving forward. We're going vertical. Everybody's excited. And that's when the supply chain came in. So now the interest rate has doubled. We can't get supplies. We had to wait 8 months for windows. And for anybody who's familiar with construction projects, you kind of need windows so you can then weather tight your property, which then kicks all of the interior stuff. So anyway, because of COVID, because of some things that were not in our control. However, I think there are things that were in our control that I missed, that I didn't want to acknowledge. We wound up getting to a point where we had spent pretty much all the money we had, and we did not have a complete project. Interest had more than doubled. Our contingency was gone. Our interest reserves were gone. And the bank said no more. And so when we were trying to renew the construction, we needed 6 more months, and we would have had everything done. But the bank didn't want to play. I had 2 investors that were kind of like the deep pockets. They didn't put any money into the project per se, but they were the deep pockets. They didn't want to put anything else in. And so we spent a year trying to find a solution. And for your listeners, Daniel, if you are going to use other people's money, your sole number one responsibility is if something goes sideways, you have to pay them back. And I'm pleased to say everybody on our project got paid back. We wound up selling our project to the deep pocket investors. They own thousands of doors. So they wound up, after the bank started to lean on them, they bought the project out. The part where I can feel good is we survived. We paid back the investors. The people who had real money in this got their money back. And I'm not going to say that I won't make mistakes again, but I think I have improved my spidey sense where I can be more honest with myself that, yeah, I put together probably the most creative financing structure that I have ever seen, and I had a bank approve it, and it would have been awesome. But it was highly leveraged. When we talk about leverage, I did not have enough of that cushion to absorb the headwinds.
Right.
I'm not sure I could have foreseen and built a model that would have weathered those headwinds. Again, luck and timing is a huge component. But at the end of the day, the asset got built for the community. It's now just market rate because things got stretched out, and that community is very anti short-term rentals, that they actually changed the zoning, which then put grandfather clauses in. And because of the delays, they lost that status. So all it can be now is multifamily without going through a big process that won't change. But to me, the takeaway is you got to listen to those voices. I think, I should have known better. If anybody should have known better, 28-year experience in banking should have seen it. I was too emotionally attached, and fundamentally, I go back to that conversation I had with myself when we were about $80,000 into it, feeling like I couldn't walk away because me and my wife didn't have that $80,000 to lose. And that is how bad decisions get made. When you feel like you have to move forward because you can't afford the loss today, that's when you need to just absorb that loss and move on.
Absolutely.
Like I said, we're going to probably make it out whole, at least my wife and I, but it burnt up a couple years of my life. The stress that I endured definitely had some bad side effects that, we'll see how it plays out. But you got to be true to yourself and know, as Kenny Rogers says, know when to fold them. And I probably should have done that.
Wow. In the project management field, we have kind of this belief that every failure is just experience that we learn from in order to grow and hopefully be better risk managers in the future. And we do these postmortems where we'll look back and we'll pick it apart a bit, but with no blame, right? It's really just to try to understand and learn. And I kind of hear that as you were talking through it, like it was painful and it was a large period of your life, but you did definitely get a lot of learning out of that. And I imagine that's making you a more, seasoned person going forward. I do want to quickly explain one thing you touched on, though, for the audience, in case you're not aware of it. You mentioned opportunity zones. So anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a federally designated distressed community where new investments with certain conditions are eligible for different tax treatment. So if you have like capital gains, you can defer those capital gains. And so you don't have to worry about that. And it's a good investment opportunity to bring new money into those kinds of areas. It sounds like you were doing an OZ. So I wanted to kind of quickly touch on that. Quick follow-up here. The Bureau of Labor Statistics say that roughly 20% of all new businesses will fail in 2 years. And construction face a 98% chance of cost overruns and delays. That's a McKinsey study. Like, these are sobering stats when it comes to the kinds of things that you're looking to do. I am curious, now that you've gone through it yourself, and you were very honest about when you were going through this, about maybe you were a little too close to it and you were attached to it and things like that. But when things were at its worst, when they were going wrong, what behaviors did you find were the most useful for you? Were you over communicating to the bank and to your lenders? Like, is there some, because we all will get stressed like this, what is the best we can hope to do in those situations?
I put this, and we did a postmortem, I did. The investor that brought real cash to the project, as it was a former president of a large commercial construction outfit, I should have used him more, because I think had I had him engaged more with the GC, there would have been a little bit more transparency. I have managed hundreds of construction projects from the lender side. I have worked with GCs. But when I'm the client, it was a different relationship. And I wish I would have brought him in, because I think we could have used him more there. I tried to over communicate with the bank. We talked about that before, relationship, right? So I was very honest when things were going sideways with the bank. We talked monthly, right? I had monthly draw requests. I told them what the delays were. Should have probably pushed a little bit more because it surprised me when they decided not to extend the construction period by 6 months because we had not maxed out the loan. We had maxed out our interest reserves because interest rate doubled, and we had tapped into, our emergency contingency. I think we probably had about 100,000, maybe 125 left, but we still had a couple $1 million in the actual line to get to, that. So I wish we probably would have had that. Okay, let's start the extension today at 6 months because we're not going to be done. But again, it's kind of like that because of the world we were living in. Even though I knew it should take 12 to 16 months to build that project, with these, are we having supply issues? Are we not having supply issues? What is the issue? What is the supply? What are we trying to get? I just never had a good feel. And I don't think, the general contractor did either. I still like him. I think things could have gone differently between him and I communicating. I still think he's a decent person, but he'd never lived through anything like that either, right? So usually when we're going through these things, we rely on previous experiences to then come up with decision making. And nobody had lived through this before. I definitely should have engaged the two main investors more. I spent too much time problem solving before I started the conversation with them because our relationship went sideways extremely quickly, surprisingly quickly, when I brought the stark reality to them, but I also brought solutions to them. And this is a few months before the bank started what they did, but they felt like they were surprised. We would talk like every 6 months or so. And when you are running $10 million projects, I think you need to have team meetings on a monthly basis. But again, during that period of history, there was so much weird stuff going on. It was a full-time job just trying to keep your sanity. And so that's where these things got missed. But it was a learning experience. I still like real estate. One of the realities, and again, this is where you have to listen to those voices, because had this project gone the way we thought it was going to go, my wife and I would still be in that community and we wouldn't be happy. The weather there sucked. We relocated to East Texas 2 years ago and have absolutely loved it. Our social network, our social activities are threefold what we had from that other community after being there for 20 years. So, sometimes things work out. Like I said, I've got scars. I still have some wounds that are healing, but we are where we're supposed to be today. And truly, if that turned into the investment and, my golden egg that I was believing it would be, we'd still be in that community because I'd have to be, keeping tracks of it. But that brings up new and exciting opportunities, right? And this is where technology, I think, really comes in. And as we talk about the side gigs, the side hustles, and what W-2 wage earners can do to help break into their freedom, is lean into where opportunities lie. Right now, I think everybody would agree real estate is overpriced. It's coming down in some markets. It's more difficult to actually buy a property. My wife and I had short-term rentals, rental arbitrage for 3 years. Great experience. We ran it completely remotely. We got out of it a year and a half ago because the market had changed and we saw that shift happening. Right now, it's not really a good environment in most communities for short-term rentals because short-term rentals supposedly are the bane of all housing issues. Well, that's not the case either. We kind of stumbled onto a new opportunity, and that's in and around AI. And with AI coding, being a banker for 30 plus years, I know firsthand some of the struggles and challenges that lenders have, especially on the commercial side. And I've always had a couple ideas running around my head on how to solve that, but I'm just an average bloke. There's no way I can jump in and actually put together some sort of, software package to solve this. But again, having good relationships, being a good partner brought me to a software development lab. And what we have been able to do is, through the use of AI coding, which has reduced the cost of creating a solution by about 75%. And so we're building this solution that we're taking to market for commercial lenders, and it's not really that expensive. Average people who see challenges, whether it's in their own industry or, in their social networks or, talking to their sphere of influence. And if you can come up with an idea how technology platforms or systems can help solve that, the barrier of entry, the cost of developing that solution has never been lower. And it's probably going to keep getting lower for the next 2 or 3 years as this technology just kind of runs. And so what I would suggest to your listeners is, I'm still a big fan of real estate because real estate never goes away and they're not making any more of it. But you got to look for where opportunities lie. And I do think that there's a certain window of opportunity with this AI assisted, fill in the blank, where people who are creative and, are willing to work more than a 40-hour week can come up with solutions that can unlock their futures. And what we have will be in the marketplace first part of next year. I'm still a W-2 wage earner. I love the work I do, keep this W-2 job, but really the financial freedom that my wife and I are going to have will come from this business that we are launching through this AI, which is fantastic. Very excited about it because it provides a tangible solution to people that I know who are living day to day with these challenges in commercial lending.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask you about Portfolio Watch. Mm-hmm. I use AI now more often to help be more productive in different things I'm doing. I know whenever I look at making an investment, I'm usually building kind of a business case analysis, like a slide deck. I even built one I presented to my own wife, where I was like, look, this is why I think we should invest in this other city.
Nice.
Because the market has this type of growth. And I think we're going to be able to get, really good rental income in a steady way and everything like that. Because, she was looking and interested in a bunch of other places. And I was looking at those as well. But I find that things like Notebook LLM, I'll just pick on one for a moment, which is a Google product, makes it super easy. You can feed a lot of source material in. It can go and pull other statistics, and it can build slide decks and even audio and video presentations. So it's really useful. I think it could be potentially something even a lender could use for ensuring they have a more productive conversation when they go to ask to borrow money with a banker or whoever. So I'm curious, maybe you can first start with talking about Portfolio Watch itself and how you're thinking about it as technology to help identify risk, and how it might level the playing field a little bit here, and also how you see the future going with these types of tools.
So specifically with Portfolio Watch, and I think the good news for those listening is this tool is going to reduce risks that commercial lenders have. If risks across the portfolio can be reduced, they are going to be more willing to say yes and take on additional risk. So again, my heart lies with capital access and putting capital into the hands of small business owners. And so as a successful lender, what I saw play out in more than one organization I worked at is as my success as a lender grew, so did my loan portfolio. But as we spoke about earlier, if I take a loss in my portfolio, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of new lending to backfill that loss. So you got to pay attention to the loan portfolio. But as a lender, I am paid, and my bonus structure is based on the new loans that I do. So I'm successful year after year. My loan portfolio keeps getting bigger and bigger. Supposed to be collecting quarterly and annual financials from our clients. Every year I'm supposed to do an annual review on each borrower because we're assessing risk, right? Which of these businesses are struggling? And my saying is, a good loan today can be a bad loan tomorrow. And it's a numbers game. You have, as a lender, you don't really know which loan is going to go sideways. I had in my career some great loans that I never expected to go sideways, but things happen. I had one that I thought was a great loan, but my borrower died. Well, we're supposed to have life insurance in place, but money was getting tight. They decided not to pay a premium. The life insurance company never notified us. My borrower dies. Now there's no life insurance to pay off the loan, right? So these things happen. So anyway, what Portfolio Watch will do is it automates the system. And it's not a big, flashy, huge workflow. It does everything from the lender from the beginning to the end. No, we designed a very specific tool that can plug into the existing platforms that commercial lenders use. It will actually do the outreach to the borrower. It will collect the financial statements and tax returns. It will automatically spread and do a financial analysis, trend analysis on those. It will actually do industry kind of macroeconomics on that industry type that borrower is in. It will actually produce an annual review, which then the commercial lender can read and see what their borrower is doing. At any point in here in real time, if data comes in and there's a negative trend developing with that borrower, it will actually alert the lender. And Acme Manufacturing, the watch score, as we call it, has deteriorated. These are the things of concern, and it flags it for him. And now he's got actually kind of a to-do list, right? He has an assigned task to reach out to that borrower, have a conversation with them to find out, is this a false negative? Because, these things happen, right? It's data, but why did they happen? Oh, this is why. The borrower is planning on doing this, this, and this. This really is not a risk for a default. Or, oh, these things are happening. There are these other bad things happening. This loan will not survive if we don't do something. And the goal is to identify this borrower who's experienced financial challenges before they miss a payment. Because if the lender can engage before a payment is missed, you have all kinds of tools in the toolbox to then help that borrower. If that borrower misses a payment, misses 2 payments, the road's kind of cast. There's not a whole lot that can be done to now save that borrower. So that's the tool that we're building. And I think as we go on, AI just opens up more time for, in this case, lenders, right? Because now if I'm freeing up time on the lender's side, they have more time to go prospect and do what they're getting paid to do. Well, at the same time, I think Portfolio Watch will do a far better job managing that loan portfolio than that lender or I ever could do, just because there's only so much time in the day.
So PwC reported that 52% of financial service companies are accelerating their AI adoption, specifically for risk management and fraud detection. My point is, companies are going to be using these tools.
Yes.
And so they're going to be there. How do you see the role of the borrower in the future? Do you think it would be a mistake to not try to use tools yourself, knowing that all these companies are going to be using them to monitor and act on their end? And do you see things like Portfolio Watch as leveling the playing field? And I guess I'm kind of asking, how do you see the future here? And is it almost like a necessity that people start thinking about adopting tools like this in order to borrow more effectively?
I think the easy answer is yes. So when AI came along, for me, I realized AI is not going anywhere. We've had other technologies come and they're all exciting, but then they fade out or they evolve into something else. I think AI is here. Don't think AI is going to eliminate everybody's job. I'm not coming to it from a fear perspective. I'm coming to it as, how can it help me make better decisions? You had Jaden Sterling on. Right? And he brought up data paralysis. I call it analysis paralysis, where you can freeze your decision-making process because you always want more data trying to look around all the corners. I think this is where AI comes in, right? Is a very useful tool that can help us make better decisions, but it should never replace our cognizant decision that's being made, if that makes sense. We use it as a tool, but we shouldn't allow it to make decisions for us.
I guess that's what I'm curious about it going, because if you look, you mentioned trading. Let's just use that example for a moment. So robo-advisors, which I've covered on the show before, are great ways to have algorithms understand your risk tolerance and to try to automatically take your contributions and invest it based on building the portfolio and managing the allocation of the portfolio that you're looking to have. It's the replacement of a human advisor. right? And it's an algorithm based one. So it's not very smart. It has a little bit of smarts in there. It's parameterized smartness, where AI would be learning and adapting and doing things. And you'd have to have a lot more trust that it could do it well. But if we get to AGI or something, I bet you it would be able to do a damn good job. Now, Jaden Sterling, I wanted to touch on that with him because he's literally building that kind of product. But I know companies like Robinhood, for instance, will go that route. Like, you just know it. They gamify everything. They try to push technology hard. So I guess my question to you, though, is yes, AI is going to be here. It's going to transform things. And it seems clear that people should be considering it as a productivity boost. But will it change the relationship we have when it comes to something, a person-to-person thing? Well, at some point, instead of dealing with a person behind a desk to try to borrow money, you're actually dealing with a system.
Yeah.
And that system is actually automating. And I'm not saying we don't have people at all. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying the jobs are gone. I'm just saying that maybe the AI would be the thing that you're going to have to interact with on that first round. Like, it's going to screen you out, maybe.
Well, yes, we have that today, right? In so much that we do and touch, we get screened out, and that's all being driven by AI. Consumer lending has already been replaced with algorithms a long time ago. And we already talked about credit scores and the weaknesses with credit scores. That ship has left. And I may be naive, right? I already said, I'm kind of a slow bloke and kind of, old fashioned, but I don't think that AI will replace commercial or business lending because, you asked me, what is the most important thing? And to me, it's character. To me, I have to know when things don't go right, and that day will come. But when they don't go right, how do you interact with me? How much trust can I have that you're going to pay me back my money? There's been more than one lender who has lost their job because they had a couple big loans that failed, right? And so if I'm an employee and I'm feeding my family, I got to trust that you're going to pay your loan back. Otherwise, I might lose my job. So I don't see how some will try, right? Some, and it'll probably be the bigger the bank, the more likely they are going to try to control their expenses around lending. So they will try. To me, that opens up more and more opportunities for these community banks, these credit unions, which are still on the learning curve, and these CDFIs. Because to me, those are the ones who are relationship based, and I don't see it moving. Yeah, they'll use AI for some of the credit, analysis that's happening today. But no, that final decision, could they be used for screening out? To a point. But if you don't have a business plan, or if you have a 125-page business plan, but in some of these other red flags, you have no cash, no collateral, and your credit score is 580, you should be screened out, because you want that lender, when somebody who's listening today takes that business plan that's well thought out and they're articulate and they're passionate, goes to that banker, you want that banker to have enough time to spend with that entrepreneur to form that relationship, to believe in that relationship and get them a loan. And if I'm having to deal with 100 potential borrowers who are not ready, that still takes up time. There's still a process. So I don't want to say that screening out with AI is always a bad thing. But what it can't do is get to a point where it's screening out good opportunities. And everything's a pendulum. So they might at first screen out too many, but then when they realize, well, now we're not doing loans, but the bank down the street that's not using AI is now getting more loans than I used to get, they bring it back, because life is fluid like that.
And that's the difference between AI and some smart algorithm, right? It'll learn and it'll get it right. And, it's really interesting hearing that, because your perspective there about why AI will not completely replace the human element is exactly my same professional opinion about why project managers will never be fully replaced by artificial intelligence. There is such an inherent human factor to that role. Yes, there's automation that will happen. It might reduce that role's capacity to a certain degree, but the human element is so critical to doing what that role needs to do that I think it's supposed to be a productivity gain, not a replacement. Thank you so much, Walt. It's been really insightful and eye-opening on all the different things we've touched. I think a large landscape, everything from how to understand where the lender's coming from to how to be a better borrower, how to prepare, what things to look for, how to get through it, and how to think about technology. I really appreciate all that. How can the listeners connect with you and also Portfolio Watch?
Thanks for having me on, Daniel. This was a fantastic conversation. Portfolio Watch is on X. It's also in LinkedIn. Walt Postelwait is also in LinkedIn. You can also send me an email from portfoliowatch.co. If you're interested in learning more, go ahead, hit me up there. Love to talk with you.
Wonderful. Thanks again for being on the show.
Daniel, thank you very much. Have a good day.
For years, I treated borrowing money as a purely mathematical transaction. You have a credit score, you put up collateral, you get a check. But speaking with Walt today, I realized I was missing the variable that actually matters, the human element. He sat on the lender's side of the table for years. When I asked him what separated the top 10% of borrowers, he didn't say assets, he didn't say cash flow, he said character. We tend to obsess about the mechanics, trying to find that perfect debt service coverage ratio or lowest interest rate. But Walt reminded us that when the plan burns down, as it always seems to try to want to do, the spreadsheet isn't what saves us, it's the relationships. Walt lived this. He shared the story of his 66-unit development disaster. He admitted to falling into the classic sunk cost trap. He was so emotionally invested that he ignored the red flags, and there were quite a few of them. Then the pandemic, with all the rising costs and doubled interest rates and a supply chain crash, it was a recipe for bankruptcy. But because he had built those relationships and he had the grit to find solutions, he navigated a catastrophic failure without destroying his reputation. Everyone got paid back and he survived. The lesson here isn't to avoid debt. Really, the takeaway is to borrow with intention, to always be looking forward, and to just be honest about limitations. Ultimately, the advice though I heard was to stop being a consumer borrower who's financing things like depreciating assets, and to move towards being a strategic borrower, trying to accelerate the path towards your financial goals. And that starts with recognizing that there's good debt and there's bad debt. Taking out an 80% loan for a boat, that's bad debt. Taking out an 80% loan to revitalize a cash flowing business, that is leverage. So whether you are looking at a business like a laundromat or trying to scale a tech startup with AI, the rules of the game hasn't really changed. You still need a business plan. You need to have capital. Most importantly, you need to have some grit because things are going to go wrong. And when they do, you still have to repay what you borrow. And that game is also only going to get faster. With 52% of financial firms adopting AI, the screening process is becoming more automated. In the worst case, predatory lending is going to scale up. But in the best case, the algorithms will start to weed out the noise, leaving lenders with more time to help the people who actually have a plan. And those tools are out there now. And if the banks are going to be using them to grade us, then we should be using them to vet our own deals. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever let a sunk cost drag you down into a bad decision? How did you get out? Shoot me an email at contact@escapetheclock.com. Best of luck borrowing with intention and escaping the clock. I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember, while I'm not yet a financial planner, I am getting my degree in wealth management. You should take anything you've heard here as tips and advice to making your plan. To learn more, visit www.escapetheclock.com. There, you can find the book, resources, including the planner, and you can even schedule time with me. Please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.